It was one of those slow, golden Sunday afternoons when the house felt like it was breathing with me. Sunlight spilled through the blinds in long, lazy stripes, stretching across the living room floor. I was moving quietly, stacking magazines, straightening cushions, letting the hum of the washing machine be the only sound. Ryan had left his phone on the coffee table before heading to the shower. I didn't think twice about it, not until the screen lit up. One name stopped me cold: Mia. I told myself to look away. I told myself I wasn't the kind of woman who goes digging. But curiosity, it's a stubborn whisper that drowns out reason. Before I even realized what I was doing, my thumb slid across the screen, and there it was, like a punch to the chest. "She can't give me pleasure the way you used to." His words, to her. My breath caught, and the air in the room felt too thin to pull into my lungs. I kept scrolling. Each message was another tiny dagger, flirtations laced with nostalgia, private jokes, little promises meant only for her. Weeks of it. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, something shifted deep inside me. The sting was sharp, yes, but beneath it, a strange, cold clarity took shape. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a gift. He'd handed me his ego on a silver platter, and I was already imagining what I'd do with it. I could hear the water running upstairs, steady and oblivious, while my world quietly rewrote itself in the living room. My fingers hovered over the phone, the glow of the screen almost daring me to go deeper. And I did. I read his pet names for her, the way he described me as if I were some tired obligation, something he had to endure. He painted himself as the poor man trapped in a joyless marriage, while she played the understanding savior from his past. The more I read, the more I realized I wasn't just hurt, I was insulted. He didn't see me as the woman who stood by him through every setback, every late bill, every dream that fell apart. He saw me as background noise in his little drama, something he could mute when he wanted a more thrilling soundtrack. And that was going to cost him. I set the phone back down exactly where he'd left it, like nothing had happened. My hands were steady now, my breathing even. It was almost frightening how quickly the storm inside me had gone still. Because I knew one thing. I wasn't going to confront him right away. No, I was going to watch. I was going to let him believe I knew nothing at all. And while he kept playing his game, I'd be quietly setting the board for mine. When he came back downstairs, hair damp, smelling faintly of his expensive body wash, I was sitting on the couch flipping through a magazine like it was just another Sunday. He smiled at me, that same easy, practiced smile, and asked what I wanted for dinner. I smiled back, even tilted my head like I was considering it. In reality, I was still hearing his words to her echo in my head, each syllable sharpening into something I could use later. I watched him move around the kitchen, opening the fridge, humming under his breath, completely unaware that the balance had shifted. He thought he was in control, that I was the same Lena who would never question where he'd been or who he'd been talking to. But in that moment, I knew better. I knew him better than he realized, and I had proof tucked away in the back of my mind, ready to be pulled out when the timing was perfect. As the evening wore on, I played my role flawlessly. We laughed over takeout, watched a movie, even kissed goodnight. But while he drifted off beside me, my mind was miles ahead, sketching out the first pieces of a plan. This wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. It was going to be an ending he'd never see coming, and one he'd never forget. The next morning, I woke up before him. I lay there for a moment, just listening to his breathing, slow and steady, like nothing in the world was wrong. My body wanted to turn toward him, to shake him awake, to demand an explanation, but my mind was already in control. I slipped out of bed quietly, letting my feet sink into the soft rug, and made my way to the kitchen. Coffee first. Always coffee. By the time he came down, I had my smile ready. It wasn't the kind of smile that showed too much, just enough to look natural. I asked about his plans for the day, nodded at all the right moments, even teased him about how long he took in the shower. It was a performance, one I intended to master. If he noticed anything different in me, it would be the calm. The same calm you see in still water right before it swallows something whole. Inside, though, the burn was still there. Not the sharp sting from yesterday, but something heavier, more deliberate. I wasn't just a woman who'd been betrayed. I was a woman with a mission. And I knew that keeping my mask in place was the first step. If he couldn't read me, he couldn't prepare for what was coming, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Over the next few days, I became an expert in controlled detachment. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh, kissed him when I was supposed to kiss him, and never once let my eyes linger on him long enough for suspicion to bloom. I asked about his workouts at the gym, about his late meetings, even encouraged him to take time for himself. Every word I spoke was bait disguised as kindness. It was strange, the power I felt in silence. I could watch him across the dinner table, talking about nothing in particular, and see the little cracks in his act, the way his phone stayed face down, the quick flick of his eyes toward it when it buzzed. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was still ahead. But I was gathering something far more valuable than evidence: patience. At night, when he fell asleep beside me, I would lie there in the dark and think about all the ways this could end. I didn't want a confrontation in the heat of the moment. I wanted precision. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own words the way I had, only magnified, and with an audience. The thought alone was enough to keep me warm under the covers while the man beside me dreamed his guilty dreams. By the fourth day, I'd slipped so easily into the role that even I almost believed it. I smiled when he came home. I asked about his day. I even leaned in to kiss his cheek as if my world hadn't shifted. But inside, I was keeping score. Every time he looked down at his phone with that faint, smug little grin, I filed it away. Every excuse about traffic or a late meeting became another tally in my mental ledger. I began studying him like a case file. The way he carried himself, the inflection in his voice when he lied, the small tells he didn't know he had. Once you've seen the truth, it's impossible to unsee it, and I could spot the falsehood in his eyes from a mile away. What amused me most was how convinced he was of his own cleverness. He thought I was still the Lena who'd never suspect a thing. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I didn't need to rush. Time was my ally now. Each day that passed without a crack in my facade made him bolder, more reckless. And the bolder he became, the more satisfying it would be when I finally pulled the rug out from under him. I could already picture the look on his face when the mask he thought was mine turned out to be his undoing. I decided it was time to give him exactly what he wanted, or at least, what he thought he wanted. So I started planting little seeds of freedom for him. "I've got a late night at work," I'd say casually, or "I'm too tired for dinner. Why don't you go out with the guys?" Each suggestion was wrapped in a smile and delivered like a gift. And every time, he took the bait without hesitation. The more I stepped back, the more he leaned into his absences. I could see it in the way he came home just a little too energized for someone who'd supposedly been at the gym. There was a lightness in his step, the kind a man carries when he thinks he's getting away with something. And I let him keep it, that smug, boyish energy, because the higher he climbed in his own illusion, the harder his fall would be. But behind the curtain, I was working. Every busy night on my calendar wasn't spent at the office. It was spent gathering ammunition. Bank statements, copied messages, quiet calls to a mutual friend who owed me a favor. Each piece I collected wasn't just proof. It was part of a performance I was scripting down to the last detail. And soon, all the actors would take the stage. One night, while pretending to work late, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, and his phone's message history mirrored onto mine. Every word he typed to her appeared on my screen like subtitles to a film I no longer felt any emotional stake in, only strategic interest. That's when I found it, the line he bragged about to her. "Lena would never have the guts to leave me." I actually laughed out loud. The arrogance, the certainty. It was the kind of overconfidence that begged to be punished. I forwarded that little gem to myself and saved it in a special folder. I even highlighted it in my mind, not just as evidence, but as a future punchline. I could already imagine his expression when those words came back to him in a room full of people. The thought gave me a rush, the kind you get when you know you're 2 steps ahead in a game your opponent doesn't even realize you're playing. From that moment, everything felt sharper. I paid closer attention to his patterns, his tells. I knew when he'd be unreachable, when he'd be most relaxed, when he'd be least suspicious. And with every passing day, I felt less like a betrayed wife and more like a conductor, leading an orchestra toward a perfect crescendo. The music was building, and I was in complete control of the score. By now, slipping into my role felt effortless. I was the picture of a trusting wife, warm enough to keep suspicion at bay, distant enough to give him space for his little adventures. He thought I was distracted, maybe even losing interest, and that only emboldened him. He'd kiss my cheek on his way out, toss me a half-hearted "don't wait up," and I'd just smile, telling him to have fun. Inside, I was already staging his downfall, piece by piece. My friend Claire became my quiet co-conspirator. She helped me cross-check dates, confirm sightings, and, more importantly, reminded me to keep my composure. There were nights I wanted to end it right then, to throw the truth in his face and watch him squirm, but Claire kept me steady. "You're not looking for a fight," she'd say. "You're building a finale." And she was right. I wasn't after an argument. I was after a masterpiece. Every document, every message, every subtle observation became part of my script. I could see the entire scene in my mind, the moment his confidence would collapse under the weight of his own words. And the best part? He was still writing new lines for me every day, completely unaware that the final act was no longer his to control. When the timing felt right, I told Ryan I wanted to host a little dinner, just close friends and family, to celebrate his recent work promotion. His chest swelled at the idea, and I could practically see the pride radiating off him. He thought it was about him. In a way it was, just not in the way he imagined. I let him pick the menu, choose the wine, even fuss over the seating arrangement. Every detail made him feel more in control, which only made my plan sweeter. The night of the dinner, I dressed with intention. Not flashy, not overdone, just enough to make sure I looked poised, untouchable. When guests began arriving, I greeted each one warmly, pouring drinks, telling stories, laughing like any gracious hostess. Ryan was in his element, soaking in the attention, oblivious to the fact that every smiling face in that room would soon witness the unraveling of his ego. As dessert was served, I felt my heart steady rather than race. This wasn't nerves. It was the calm that comes from knowing you're holding all the cards. I picked up my glass, tapping it gently with a spoon. Conversations hushed. All eyes turned toward me. I smiled, the kind of smile that keeps people guessing whether they're about to hear something wonderful or devastating. And then I began my toast. I started with the usual pleasantries, how proud I was of Ryan's accomplishments, how grateful I was for the friends and family gathered here tonight. I could feel him basking in it beside me, his arm draped loosely around the back of my chair. Then I mentioned how, in any marriage, there are challenges, moments that test you, moments that reveal the truth about who we really are. I caught a flicker of curiosity in a few faces, but Ryan's smile never wavered. He still thought this was his celebration. That's when I reached for my phone. "And sometimes," I said, my voice warm but steady, "the truth has a way of writing itself." A few taps, and the big TV on the wall lit up with a message thread. His message thread. I didn't need to explain whose phone it came from. The first words on the screen said enough. "She can't give me pleasure the way you used to." The silence was instant and absolute. No coughs, no shuffling, just the hum of the refrigerator in the background. I watched his face drain of color, the easy charm slipping away in slow motion. Around the table, eyes widened, jaws tightened. Some looked at him with pity, others with something closer to disgust. And me? I just took a sip of my wine. I didn't rush. I scrolled through the messages slowly, reading a few select lines aloud in a voice so calm it almost felt polite. Each word hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. I saw his hands clench under the table, his jaw tightening with every sentence I recited. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. When I reached the part where he bragged, "Lena would never have the guts to leave me," I paused just long enough to let it settle. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke. The room felt frozen, suspended in that perfect, excruciating moment where everyone knew the balance of power had shifted, permanently. I let the final message fade from the screen, my phone still in hand. I said, looking at him with a measured smile. Everyone here deserved to know the man we were toasting tonight. My voice was steady, almost gentle, but my eyes told him exactly what this was, the public execution of his pride. And judging by the silence, every person in that room understood. I set my phone down and reached for the envelope I'd kept tucked under my chair all evening. The heavy cream paper felt almost ceremonial in my hands as I placed it gently in front of him. His fingers hovered over it, but he didn't open it right away. Maybe because some part of him already knew what it was. I leaned in just enough so only he could hear me. "Since I can't give you what you want," I said softly, "I'll give you the freedom you bragged about." The color that had drained from his face earlier didn't return. His shoulders sagged slightly, and for once he wasn't performing. He was just exposed, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. Around us, whispers began to ripple through the room, guests exchanging glances, eyes darting between us and the unopened envelope like they were afraid to breathe too loudly. I straightened my posture, took one last sip of my wine, and let my gaze sweep the room, not with shame, but with the quiet authority of someone who had just reclaimed her dignity in the most undeniable way. In that moment, I wasn't the woman he'd betrayed. I was the woman who had just rewritten the ending of our story, and every single person in that room was now part of the audience. He finally opened the envelope. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint tear of paper as he slid the documents out. His eyes scanned the first page, and I saw the exact moment the reality hit him, the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, the way his chest rose in a slow, shallow breath. Divorce papers, signed, dated, irrevocable. I didn't give him time to find his voice. "No discussions, no negotiations," I said, my tone even, almost casual. "You made your choice weeks ago. I'm just making sure it sticks." His lips parted as if he might argue, but no words came. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't crumble under the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. Someone coughed softly, a fork clinked against a plate, and I realized the dinner party was still technically happening, just in an entirely different reality than the one he'd envisioned. He sat there, papers in hand, stripped of the swagger that had carried him into this evening. And me? I felt lighter, not because I was leaving him, but because I was doing it on my own terms, with every ounce of my self-respect intact. I pushed my chair back slowly, the sound of its legs scraping the floor cutting through the thick silence. Every eye in the room followed me as I stood, smoothing the skirt of my dress with calm, unhurried hands. Ryan was still frozen in place, the papers lying limp in his grasp, his gaze fixed somewhere on the table as if avoiding mine might undo what had just happened. I didn't offer a final word to the guests. I didn't need to. The message had been delivered with precision, and the silence it left behind was louder than anything I could have said. As I walked toward the door, I caught a glimpse of Claire's faint smile from across the room, the kind of smile that said, "You did it." The air outside was cool against my skin, almost cleansing. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and kept walking. Behind me, the muffled voices of the guests began to stir, fragments of shock and disbelief drifting out into the night. But I didn't look back. This was no longer my scene. The curtain had fallen, the story was finished, and I was free, leaving him to sit alone in the ruins of his own making.